Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Well, I'm really excited to welcome Debbi Sayers from Salisbury Rovers to the show. Debbi, welcome.
Thank you very much, Stu. Good to be here this morning to talk to you.
Well, I think what might be a good starting point. I mean, anybody who's sort of followed me on Twitter and is, involved in some of the conversations, we've had lots and lots of interactions, and I've, championed a lot the stuff that you guys have been doing. But you're better to tell me the story. So tell me all about Salisbury Rovers. Tell me all about what you're doing and the whole package.
Okay, really short potted history. We started the club about 2.5 years ago, and I started it as a avid football fan and parent who had some limited experience with youth football through my youngest son, and what I'd seen I didn't like. It didn't sit consistently with me. In terms of both being a parent but also being a fan of creative, expressive football. And I was quite shocked really at what I saw within the kind of 6 months my son was with another team. He was only 9 at the time. There was lots of shouting, lots of direction. And I just thought, is there not another way? So I started to chat to people, connect to people that I knew who were involved in football. I also started to run an after-school football club, which I just let children turn up and play, and that kind of blossomed and developed. And eventually decided to set up the club, and from very humble beginnings on a free council pitch, we've accelerated to the stage that we are now Wiltshire County FA's Charter Standard Club of the Year within 2.5 years. And that has been the result, I think, of a mammoth effort by the volunteer workforce primarily, but also the professional coaches that we've got engaged with us. Particular special mention has to go to David Podger, who has really transformed our coaching environment within the last year, but also the children and the parents buying into what we do, because what we do is different. So I think that takes us to where we are today, really, without going too much into the philosophy to start with.
So tell me more about that kind of sort of genesis moment, I suppose, because I think I've heard similar stories, and I think there's actually, interestingly, quite a lot of parents, I think, out there who decide to get into coaching or decide to start a team, you went further and decided to go for an entire club, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But, started it, whatever it is, because they're kind of slightly concerned about what they're seeing elsewhere and the kind of philosophy. So kind of what was it that drove that?
Two things drove that, really clear in my memory, and always will be. My son likes to play in goal. We watched, and if you want to get down to the technical details of it, my son was playing in a team in which he would never have got out of goal. So he was, he turned up. Oh, you're good in goal. You can go in goal. You will now always be in goal from the age of 9. And straight away, I was, kind of thinking, what? This is ridiculous. And one match I watched him being directed to come out of goal, go back into goal, come out of goal, go back into goal. This is not within the space of a match. This was in the space of a kind of football interaction. Move back, move forward, move back, move forward. I could just see him being absolutely destroyed. All his decision-making powers being taken away from him, and feeling completely deflated when the outcome that the coach wanted didn't happen. And actually, he'd had no part in that outcome anyways, because he'd been directed all the way through. And I had the last match he played, I remember saying to him at half time, do what you want. Just make a decision and do what you want. And at that point, I knew that, there was not going to be a kind of meeting of minds there between myself and the environment that particular team had. But it wasn't just my child. My child was friends with an absolutely fantastic, lovely little boy who's now at an academy. Super kid and an amazing little player. It's the dream dribbler that everybody wants to watch, taking people on. Just such a brilliant little kid. Again, directed to the extent that the creativity goes, directed to the extent that his head falls. He's not making decisions for himself. And I just felt that environment was unhealthy. From both a child development perspective, but also for a football development perspective. And when you try and engage people in that conversation about why can't they all play different positions? Why can't they play without you directing them? There was a very intransigent response to that. So that's when I started to look around to see whether there were clubs in which there would be more of a kind of willingness to embrace putting the child at the centre of the decision-making process. And I had lots of conversations with people, conversations with the county FA as well. My view after those conversations was that this could only happen by starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. And that's why I started the club rather than hopped in on another team, really.
Wow. So there's a lot of parents out there who, I generally have a perception, and, a lot of this is based on just sort of personal experience, but lots of parents, I don't think, necessarily know the difference. So in actual fact, funnily enough, one of the challenges that someone like, say, Steve Hooper at Inclusion Coaching he talks to me a lot about, is when he provides an environment that is non-directed, he gets quite a lot of parents saying, what are you doing?
Yeah,
why? So what was it, where did your knowledge come from that, or what was the kind of underpinning, I guess, underpinning idea that you had? Where did it come from that you thought, this isn't the right thing, it shouldn't be like this, it needs to be like this? Had you kind of experienced something elsewhere, or were you a different part of your career or whatever? I don't know.
Yeah, potentially you are, for some of you, a whole life experiences, aren't you? So, throughout my life, I'm a lawyer by profession. People might not think that's a particularly creative profession, but it actually is in lots of ways. And autonomy and decision making, using evidence to support what you're doing, reflecting on your practice is really core to what I do in my daily life. Really, challenging yourself all the time. I work in a culture where people will say, "I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right because I think this is right," and I don't have a problem with that. And I think those cultures are really healthy. So trying to create an environment in which adults who are surrounding the children can feel that they can question what's going on in a healthy fashion, it creates a positive environment for the children as well. But in terms of being able to personally express yourself in your own development, autonomy is absolutely critical. And it seems to me that's, as a parent, my experience is that, children need to be able to make decisions for themselves. That's not, they don't make every decision for themselves, but you create a kind of framework around that decision making for them in which they've got a context and they can use their information to try and inform how they're trying to develop themselves. And in a football sense, that is actually quite easy to do because you can create games in which children, like Steve does, have to make lots of decisions for themselves. The difficulty with that compared to the more traditional forms of coaching is that it's not obvious to parents. So the coaching isn't obvious, the teaching isn't. If you've got a really traditional form of coaching, you talked a lot about drills, and that's what we're really talking about, or lots of vocal direction from the sidelines. It's really obvious what the coach wants. The teaching appears really obvious. What's not obvious is the learning. And time again, it seemed to me that it's that learning aspect that we're missing out. So we're not even engaging with children. We're not even having a conversation a lot of the time with children. You'll get people talking about person before player and the whole person, and yet a coaching session will go by and no child will be asked to make one decision for themselves about the game or the way the session's developed. Speak to children. talk to children. It doesn't seem to me to be rocket science, but if you put them in the centre and you let it be a more dynamic two-way process, then it seems to me that that is an environment in which creativity has a chance of flourishing.
I mean, the fascinating thing from my perspective is going back to what you said about learning, and this is probably one of the challenges that I often find myself in when I'm having these kinds of discussions and debates. Quite a lot of people, I suppose it depends on what your view of learning is. So I think some people view learning as compliance.
Yeah.
And so, for example, if within a coaching session, what an individual sees is, I've provided you with the right way to do this. If you comply with that and you follow instruction appropriately, that is learning, because I have brought about the correct behavior.
Yeah.
The bit they miss often is that, and these are the ones that then are the people who, and I was one of them, right? So I'm happy to say that I'm speaking from bitter experience here, was I would say this thing and we'd talk about it, I'd be explicit, I'd give these instructions, it'd be very structured, very ordered, and then the game would happen. The match, if you like. And this is with adults as well, not just kids. And the game would happen, and I would say to somebody on the sideline, we've just spoken about that.
I hear that so much. So much. I'm wasting my time. What did we do in training?
Yeah. And so that's the problem, I think, is that kind of limited view of learning being a very explicit process, being a very directional, instructional process, and it's about the following of instruction.
Yeah.
If you view learning like that, then clearly that's the approach that you're going to take. But if you view learning as a self-directed thing, so, self-determination theory, as individuals, working within an environment, exploring the ways in which they might be able to achieve something, which is how I conceive of learning, and actually also how I've always enjoyed to learn. And I'm like most people, my schooling, I kind of just played the game. I did what needed to be done to get the results to get me to the next stage. I only really learned to love learning when I went to university, and I found my passion and something that I could really explore within. But that was the only time I'd ever experienced learning of that kind before. So I'm very passionate about that experience for others.
I think as well, I think that's absolutely right, that distinction in terms of how we view learning. But I wonder how much people actually think about whether they're delivering according to any learning philosophy whatsoever.
Absolutely.
So actually it goes much deeper than this. What we're talking about, I feel very strongly, and I feel this more and more the longer I do this, is that we've got a culture which has many vested interests in many various forms, and everybody's used to doing things in a certain way, and there's really no reflection on the way that they do it, and it's really no evaluation about whether or not what they do works. It's just the way that it's done. And I think that's, I've been involved in lots of different kind of areas of my life where you've campaigns and things like that where you've had to try and create change. And it's always the case. There's always, to create change to what the status quo is currently is a really, really hard thing, because people are used to doing things in a certain way, and institutions and organizations and practices are embedded upon that culture. And so is it any more difficult, or is it any more... Is the realism actually just that this is the way we do things, this is the way we've always done things, and this is the way we will continue to do things? It's not even about questioning whether anybody's learning. I mean, that's the reality that I think sometimes you face. And
I think, in coach education as well, I think that's, for me, is like one of the failings is we never really ask people who are in charge of children's learning to even critically reflect on different learning theories. So funnily enough, I just recorded an episode yesterday for the podcast with a guy called Don Vincent at the University of Worcester. And he's a coach like me, works in a hockey context. But, one of the things that we talk a lot about is, kind of what's your theory of learning? What do you base your practice on? And I was working with a group of coaches recently as well. And I asked that question, why do you coach the way you coach? That's the question I ask a lot.
Yeah.
And often they coach the way they coach because they either were taught to do so on a course, by some form of authority figure, usually a governing body, or they saw another coach and they attended a workshop or a CPD, or they got the chance to observe them and watch them, and they saw them do that, so I'm going to do that same thing. Or a lot of them are actually just basing it on their personal experience. So the personal experience will be either negative experiences or positive experience, and they want to model a positive experience and all that sort of stuff. All fine, not a problem. But that's not, like you say, that's not quite deep enough. You need to go a little deeper to really understand, right, so I actually belong to kind of this theoretical model of learning. So actually, I need to explore this in a little bit more detail. Oh, and actually, maybe there's something over here that I could learn from as well. But people never actually ask themselves those questions.
No, they don't. We don't even get there because that, the status quo is it functions.
Yes.
And so unless it's broken, and what does broken mean in football terms? It means potentially that we don't get creative players through at the elite end, I suppose, but it actually means children staying in the game more than else. It means people retaining players in the game. And yet, even though there is that evidence really that potentially we're broken in both aspects, then we're not really seeing a challenge to that status quo. So, I mean, that's why, I'm pretty vocal on Twitter. And that's why. Because where is the challenge? If things have got to change, if there is a different way, and I think there is a different way, and it doesn't have to be my way, but I think there are questions that people need to be asking themselves about the way that they coach, about the way coaches and clubs deliver, about the way leagues operate, about the way the whole system operates. Then it has to come from somewhere because the system isn't working.
I mean, and interestingly, what I think is really great though is you've got essentially a grassroots movement that's kind of happening through, you guys as an example, and we'll get more into your environment in it shortly. And there are others, and I'm not going to go as far as to say that this is, it's anywhere near the majority or the norm, but there definitely are others, and I spoke in the previous podcast about my son's first footballing experience and the environment that coach is creating, and he's definitely aligned philosophically to what we're talking about here, and it's happening more and more and more, but it's pockets, isn't it?
It is absolutely, yeah. And sorry, if I can just say that, and it's a really important point, I think, to make this, that we are not in isolation in terms of trying to make what we feel is a positive change. We, through our experience, have connected with some exceptional coaches locally and nationally, and there are lots and lots and lots of good people out there, but we are in a minority, and it's connecting people really. So it would be, and sometimes people feel very isolated. Good coaches can feel isolated within a club. Good clubs can feel isolated within a league. So it's really important, I think, for me to say that we're not trying to say that we're, kind of like beacons of good practice in the sense of everybody should do what we're doing and that we're the only ones, because, we see it all the time. I've got matches this weekend running with coaches who are prepared to play different formats, mix up teams, lots of really good child-centred practice around, but very, very much in the minority. And it's not led from the top. This is coming from the bottom, and that's an important distinction.
It is. Now, one thing I was going to say though is, in fairness to the governing body, in this case the FA, I actually do believe, having spent time with a number of the people there, that they are absolutely philosophically bought in to, if they could have every club like your club, I think they probably would. The problem is, having been in governing bodies, is that I kind of understand this, is that the pace of change from the top all the way down, it takes a lot longer than, even the people working in those contexts, they get frustrated. I got frustrated at the pace of change. So actually, one of the things that I think often is best to happen, and this is why I think, you've been given, the Charter Standard Club Award, is because I think what they're then doing is that they recognise that the pace of change brought from the top is actually going to be slower than the grassroots movement. So one of the best ways to do it is to kind of empower and strengthen and shine a light on the grassroots movements. it's not an ideal situation, but it's just the nature of sports governance, sadly.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And again, just as there are many good coaches around there, there are some really excellent people in the FA. Without a shadow of doubt, we've had an enormous amount of help from the county FA. So there's absolutely no criticism there. I just think in practical terms, and it's a conversation I've had with people who are on Twitter who work for different FAs, there'd be very simple things that you can do as a governing body that does not mean you have to transform the system. For example, don't sanction tournaments without ensuring that there's a basic good practice code of conduct in place. Really a simple thing to do, but tournaments in the summer are some of the worst experiences children can get, some of the best, but some of the worst as well, and sanctions on a massive scale with hundreds, potentially thousands of children attending with not even a respect sign or a code of conduct. Now, that's a really simple change that could be made overnight. So there needs to be more thinking about small concrete steps that can that they've got the power to make at grassroots level overnight, at the drop of a hat, really.
I do agree. I do think there's been times, certainly in my career working within the governing body landscape, where there's things that we could do really quite easily and really quite quickly, and I've never quite been able to understand and put my finger on why we haven't. Having said that, I think sometimes people have people don't quite appreciate the level of influence that a governing body necessarily has. They sort of think that they can click their fingers and magic it. And the weird thing is that sometimes they do that, and they bring in regulation, which actually everyone just gets a bit like, oh God, why are we doing that? But it depends. I mean, so Nick Levett, who's been on the show a number of times, worked at the FA, he kind of led the change in terms of the kind of structure of youth competition to reduce the numbers, right? Well, 2 years of work, something like 100,000 miles worth of travel or something along those lines. And he wasn't necessarily getting paid to do that. That was something he took upon himself because a group of people within the organisation decided they thought this was worth a change. He was physically threatened on 2 or 3 occasions by individuals with vested interests who ran big youth leagues who said, stay off my turf because this is nicely lucrative for me. So I think one of the things I'm trying to stress is that I think sometimes an expectation on the governing body can be far too high in terms of what they're capable of doing. But your point is an absolutely valid one, which is there are simple, quick and easy things that could be done. And actually, sometimes they lose sight of that almost.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of like if you're trying to create that culture for yourself. So any team that comes to play us, we've got a code of conduct, and we ask them if they agree to abide by that before they come and play us, and we don't play them if they won't. Simple as that. They've got that power. So they've got, a sanctioning power there that could be used for the benefit of children. And I think that's where my frustration comes, because I don't do this for me. I know volunteer coach really does it for themselves in that sense, but, this is about children. And if that means we've got to make life difficult for adults sometimes, and we've got to say things that adults don't like, well, that's what we've got to do because they're children. And that's our responsibility. And so I think there needs to be a little bit more bravery there sometimes about saying, actually, we do think that this is good practice, and not hedging your bets. You can coach how you want, but have you thought about, it's like, can you really coach how you want? Is that the best for children? Because some of the shouting and bad practice borders on safeguarding issues as well. So you're kind of like, well, really there has to be a strong lead. And I think also with my lawyer's head on, when you're talking about cultural change often comes from creating the laws, which people don't like. That might be, race discrimination, laws on sexual harassment, Equality Act, etc. They might, balk at it. They might say that's never going to work. You can't do it. But actually, it creates a cultural landscape change and that context change. And I think that's something which needs to be borne in mind as well. That people might not like it and they might argue with you, but actually, you set your stall out, and there will be a change. And might take a long time, but it'll take less time than by being silenced.
Yeah, and that's a fundamental point. It sounds like I'm being an apologist for governing bodies now, because as you know, on this podcast, I have been a staunch critic of some governing bodies over my time here. But one thing I would say is that I do find in all of my time, governing bodies sometimes they can't make their minds up between education and legislation. But part of the problem is they see it as an either or.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no, it's not either or.
No, it's not. No.
one of the things that a governing agency can do is legislate if it genuinely believes that that's also part of a problem, by the way, is there isn't always consensus. And that's actually one of the things that they don't necessarily what's the word I'm looking for find is because you have divergence of opinion within that kind of either within the organization itself, or you have a divergence of opinion even out there in the landscape, even though you've consulted. Sometimes you end up with a kind of a legislation that's kind of not really going far enough, and it's it's sort of so because it's like everything's done by compromise, which basically means everybody's a bit annoyed, But I do agree with you. I think in general, I have found sometimes in some of the experience I've had where the organisation seems to veer from like almost being quite draconian in certain aspects of regulation, and then almost a bit laissez-faire in the other areas that probably are more important. And I think they need to ask that question of themselves, and it's for any governing agency of any kind, really. And you work with them all the time, I suppose, which is to say, are we going to legislate, or are we going to educate, or sorry, is our role here to take these steps, even though it might be universally unpopular?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's
the best for children?
Yes.
What's the best for children in that situation?
The other problem, though, is that the scientific consensus isn't necessarily there either. So it's not even if you can go back to the science and say this is the best thing for children, although that's not quite true.
About really, broad. You talk about areas of consensus, and that's a really important point, because we're not saying, or I wouldn't say on a personal level, do everything that we do because that's the best for children. This is the way we do things. However, there are certain things that we can categorically say are not good for children.
Yes.
So allowing matches, leagues, tournaments to take place where there is screaming at the sidelines from adults, and a lot of it is negative, is not good for children. And if anybody wants to say that it is, then provide evidence that creates a kind of player that wants to continue in the game. I cannot say in any other walk of life, if you walked into your child's classroom and the teacher was screaming like that, if you saw somebody screaming in a supermarket, you would think that's really, that's good. That's good for that child to have that screaming going on. And so from a governing body level, it seems to me that's an area you could tackle quite simply.
And so my question there then is, without wanting to make this an esoteric governing body debate, what action would you take if you were given the, if you became the youth football czar, what action would you take in that context then to be able to bring about that behaviour change on the sideline?
I can talk from our own experience here that we have a set of guidelines. So we have a code of conduct for matches, which we send out to the other side. And it has really simple things like, remember, this is a children's football game. We encourage lots of positive encouragement for the children. We would ask you to support both sides. We ask you not to direct play from the sidelines. Directing play means pass it, use your left foot, throw it down the line. Got to give lots of practical examples. We've got refreshments. Please come and chat to other parents while you're having it. Please just sit back and enjoy the game. So I don't think that's particularly controversial, really.
No.
And what I do before every match, if I get time, sometimes I'm busy doing other things, is that I'll then speak to both sets of parents that have attended on the day, and I'll explain why we asked them to do that. I'll explain what our philosophy is, and that's including the parents on the other side as well. And I'll encourage them. And at the end, I'll thank them and say, that they're amazing, and that they're setting such a good example for children's sport. And we've not really had any example where parents haven't come away with smiles and felt that their child's had a good experience from both sides, and that's for coaches too. And I think I'd like to think that the way that we run things actually takes a lot of pressure off adults, because we're saying, you can't get involved. There's no choice. There's nothing you can do. Step back, relax. It's not up to you to save your child's game today. It really isn't. Nobody's expecting football coaching gold dust to be scattered across the pitch with amazing directions. Let the children play and get on with it. And let's all just enjoy that. And I think that does create a positive environment. And you don't have to go as far as us, but there could be very, very simple things that you could say. Like, we think you should not do this. Simple.
So Actually, then, just exploring that in more detail, one of the things that you've had to do, if I'm right, is you've had to opt out of formal competition structures in order to be able to get other organisations to come and play matches that buy into the equivalent philosophy. Is that correct?
What we did was in the first year that we launched, we put children in leagues locally, and the experience was mixed for a variety of reasons, not criticising the other clubs at all, but we often had children starting their football experience at the very kind of, I suppose, what's crazily considered an older age of 10. They've not played football before, let alone played a football match. And they were routinely getting hammered, and that's not a positive experience. And you're looking at children who are starting at that age and you're thinking, really, they should be playing five-a-side, or really they should be playing 20-minute matches, or really they should be playing in a completely different format. And we did get some managers who would adapt the game, but we've got no authority to be able to ask that of them. And so what we decided to do as a club, and we took soundings from parents, from all our coaches, we spoke to lots of coaches at elite level as well as grassroots level, and asked those questions. Does playing in a team, in a league, in fixed formats every single week necessarily, is that determinative of a good developmental outcome? And the resounding response that we got was not necessarily, as long as they're playing football. Parents have got this attachment, and adults sometimes, to the distinction between a match in mini soccer at 8, which is in a league, and a match at mini soccer at 8, which is a so-called friendly. But the children don't make that distinction. And so we decided that if children wanted matches, we would create a matches programme, but that matches programme would be outside of leagues, so that we had total flexibility. We can play children up, we can play children down, we can choose the format size, we can choose to play indoors, which was another issue during the winter. We couldn't hold league matches inside because that wasn't part of the regulations. So we can do futsal, we can do hard court matches if we wanted, we can do virtually, the sky's the limit. We've got this big choice of what we can do that will aid our children's development, and so it can be geared towards what they need. So I've got examples of matches on at the weekend where I've got a very new group of under 9s who haven't played together before, have agreed with the other manager that we probably play below the kind of sort of, it's called an FA maximum, but we all know that it's considered to be the figure that you're supposed to field a team at 7 at under 9, 7 players. We may play 5. We'll adapt the match. We'll probably make the pitch smaller. We'll adapt as we go. We'll play quarters. We'll just see how the children are getting on. And I've got another team that's under 11s and under 12s mixed. I wouldn't have been able to do that necessarily in the league. So it just means that we can gear things to the children themselves, really.
So you're using a mixed competitive offering, mixed diet of competitive offer, based on the participant need and the best thing that's going to give them the best experience and the best developmental opportunity. And you are, like I said, you're going multi-surface and this, that, and the other. But the rationale, not the rationale, but what you're essentially doing there is devising or using the competitive offer or the competitive opportunity as a developmental opportunity, as opposed to a kind of an end in itself. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a very well done. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I very much say that matches are part of the development programme. They are not. There's so much connection, and I think this comes from an adult perception of what football should look like, and that it should look like adult football. So kids in kits in teams in leagues, because that resembles an adult model, and kids training for their Sunday or Saturday match, because that resembles an adult model. But kids aren't adults, and so we've got different developmental priorities, and we see that competitive aspect, which is competitive, is one part of that developmental model, but it's not everything that we're gearing up for. We're not training the 6-year-olds on a Saturday morning for the big match on a Sunday. We're just not. So their experience during the club sessions on a Saturday morning, or whether they come to our free sessions in the week for a variety of community projects that we run, is just as important as them playing that match.
Yeah,
that's the way, like, it's that parity really between the developmental experiences.
the beauty of that for me is, I'm not sure people realise this, but like you say, what you're saying before about the training for the match, some people might be listening to going, what's wrong with that? Well, what I don't think they realise is that it makes you, whether you realise it or not, it makes you very short term. And you prioritise things that are going to enable you to achieve success in the game on the weekend. So you might, for example, you might get focused on working on, kicking the ball long. Why? Gives you success.
Yeah.
Because actually playing the ball in short and small areas, actually, they haven't quite yet got the skill level and the mastery to do that. So they can easily lose possession of the ball, which can then result in a goal against. So actually, and that actually, funnily enough, happened to my son last week when, in his first game, the team had worked on, because the coach is philosophically aligned to the idea of let's work on how we can pass the ball and how we can pass the ball to get up the field together. And so the goalkeeper rolled it out to him at right back, and he got the ball, and he like, oh God, what am I going to do now? And then he got robbed, and they went away and scored. But the coach was trying to do the right thing. Someone on the sideline shouts, "Just get rid of it."
Yeah.
And of course, so this is where where it all happened. But anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is, I think people don't recognise that you need to make the competitive offer align to the capabilities of the individuals, but also align to the learning journey that those individuals are on. So if you're working on, for example, if you can do this, but if you're working on, a kind of environment where you're talking about lots and lots of, say, moving with the ball, so there's lots of dribbling, then actually your weekend game should have a rule set that actually encourages lots and lots of dribbling, not discourages it immediately.
Yeah.
But that's witchcraft, isn't it?
But it's also that, and I think it's a really important point to say, almost like a disconnect between matches and the whatever you call, which we deliberately do not use the word training. We don't train children. Right. Yeah, children come and they play and they learn about football, but we don't train them. It's important to see developments and exposure, I think, to every football experience during those club sessions, so that they're getting, with their own input as well, the fullest possible experience as part of their developmental journey as they go. And that can be quite separate from a match. Yeah. And as they get older, things change. So, for example, with 6-year-olds, we had 6-year-olds playing last week. We played 3v3s to start with the team, very progressive, fantastic manager that we played against. We did little 3v3 matches, and then they did 1 5v5. But there's no objective. I'm not telling them how to pass, where to pass. I'm not even telling them to dribble, because what you don't want to do, for me, is to replace one orthodoxy about which we've had, a pass culture, with a stay on the ball culture. Yeah. This is about decision making, and children will make lots and lots of what we consider as adults, with our amazing football wisdom that we all think we've got, as poor decisions. Mm-hmm. Or wrong decisions, but we've got to let them make decisions. And if that means that actually sometimes you've got 5-6-year-olds on a pitch who get distracted by a plane going overhead, or are more interested in chatting to each other, so be it.
Flossing.
So be it. Yeah, that's it. That's the end of it. And people get irate when they see that, because they want coaches to have an objective, but play doesn't always have to be objective outcome based. And the most important experience maybe at that age is for them just to be on a pitch and experiencing the social side of being in a team and just running around and being crazy and chasing the ball. But what I can tell you is, and that's why sometimes that our philosophy can be seen by more traditional approaches as being, that's okay for the fun. That's a fun club for kids who aren't really serious about football. They just want to have a little bit of fun. What I can tell you is, and we've only been going 2 years, but the difference between moving through the year groups and how that changes organically in terms of priorities with children is really important. So our under 14s play in a very different way. They're not looking at, chatting and looking at daisies and watching planes. They're self-organising. They're coming up with the tactics. They're coming up with the formations. They're reviewing their practice during half times and quarters. They're communicating, changing positions on the pitch. And they've got a massive amount of ownership and autonomy within the game, and they play some fantastic football. So all of that long-winded thing is to disconnect whatever's going on in your club session or your training from necessarily in the matches, and understand that development is age appropriate, that they're children and that they change and their priorities are different over time. Their developmental priorities are different between child and certainly between age groups. And putting a child in a team does not necessarily mean that team-based football or team-based priorities or objectives are appropriate for children.
I was trying to write so much of that down that I got distracted.
Rambling on, sorry.
No, you're not. It's just there's so much and it's so rich that I'm just trying to keep up. But my one of the things I was thinking about there is, and it goes back to, so I obviously, as you know, I talk a lot on this podcast about ecological dynamics. I talk a lot about constraints and environments, and so what a lot of people don't, I think, realize is, and this probably goes back to what we were talking a little bit earlier on about kind of learning philosophy or learning theory, but where your philosophy is rooted from. And if your philosophy is rooted from the perspective of the children's experience being paramount, then philosophically, then you're going to say, well, actually, we have to consider that in every sense. We can't go, actually, their experience is fine, but we've got to enter them into a competitive league because you just have to do that, and we're going to have to sacrifice the quality of that experience. No, you don't. You actually do what you've done and said, no, we're going to opt out of that because that is completely at odds with the experience that we want these young people to have. And I mean, just coming back to what you said there about, I don't think people realize, from an ecological standpoint, that how important the environment is on everybody's behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
So coaches, club administrators, etc., if you're in a certain environment, you behave in a certain way. It forces you, whether you're sometimes unwittingly, you kind of get guided. And I've seen it. I've literally seen it happen in a rugby context. The difference between a festival where everybody plays the same number of matches, we don't really keep score. Obviously, some people want to, but that's up to them. And they just play lots of rugby. It's mixed ability teams and all that sort of stuff. And there's no semi-final and final and cups and shields. The difference in human being, adult human being behaviour versus a tournament where there's a semi-final and a final and a cup and a shield and a medal.
Yeah.
It's absolutely stark.
Yeah.
I've took video of it. And it's happened to me. I've been in a tournament environment with a semi-final. The kids feel all the pressure.
Absolutely.
I start acting in a different way and make different decisions. And like I said, it's so easy. It's almost a little bit. It happens sort of a little bit below the radar, and it's only on reflection you go, "What the hell was that? What was that all about?" So actually, the best thing to do sometimes is just don't put yourself in that environment.
Yeah. And you do need to. This is such an important point, and I think, and I've had matches. Just as an example, a match that I played with my mixed under 13s, 14s a few weeks ago, and the environment was so loud and so directive, it bordered on toxic. And the only thing I had to say in terms of direction when the children came off the pitch, and they are still children at 13. People do forget that. Is this, you must feel depressed. Do you feel depressed? And because the kind of elation and creativity about football had just gone out of their game, and do not listen to them. Let's be us. Let's have fun. This is about you going out there, showing all the amazing skills that you've got, doing all the amazing things you can do, and having fun, playing with each other, don't listen to that wall of sound. And so, they were much better and much more confident, but I could see it sapping. It had such a massive, dramatic impact on performance, and it wasn't even coming from their own side. And that's what frustrates me about it, really, because children deserve a space in which they can experiment and make lots of mistakes and not have a fear of failure. And I've seen school matches which are like that. You can see school matches are a whole different kettle of fish, but they're kind of the win at all costs culture. It seems to be fairly paramount there. And the environment, you can feel it. You can feel the difference, and you can see the difference in children's play. And so if performance is impacted, then we've got a real problem, because we're not saying that performance is impacted by children just being nervous because they're in a competition. And I think that's the mistake a lot of people maybe make, is that they conflate those environments as being, well, that's what competition is. And that's what we're exposing children to. That's what real life is. And so they've got to learn to do that. That's not competition. Children wanting to go out on a pitch and beat another team and wanting to do their best and getting angry and frustrated when they can't score a goal or that goals are going in, that's competition. Children taking ownership and saying, right, on this pitch today, I am going to do this and I'm not going to give up and I'm going to win the ball back. That's competition. Screaming adults at the side of a pitch, that's not competition. That's just adult focused culture, which has become so pervasive that we don't even notice it, how toxic it is. And so that's why, we kind of sat down during the summer and we looked about what we really wanted to say that we stood for. And one of our young student coaches, Julian Stella, came up with the phrase football environmentalism, which I thought summed it up really neatly. We are about creating an environment in which children feel free to express themselves, but it goes deeper than that as well. We create an environment in which the very nature of what we provide or offer to children in terms of coaching is about embedded opportunities within games to learn. It's not about directive play. So then again, the child is still here. Would you like to come and play this game today? This is these are the things that we can do within this game. What can you do? What can you add to it? So it's a dynamic environment in which children have got a real role to play. And hopefully that then has an effect on the adults when they can see that children are happy, that parents are happy, that coaches enjoy, standing back and having that conversation with children about how they change and progress the game. And, it should hopefully continue to create the positive culture that we all want to enjoy, really.
Ironically, going back to your point earlier on about how kind of pervasive this cultural stuff has become without people realizing, is it's only when they experience the alternative that they begin to realize the genuine joy that can be derived from that other environment, but they need to be exposed to it first.
It's also, it's so much more complicated, I think that's absolutely right. But just from a personal experience, it can be more complicated because actually people experience that and then they say, they deride it. They deride fun and joy. They deride play. Play is of no value. Why should I turn up here with my child if they're just playing? You're not teaching them anything. That coach over there, I can hear him. I can hear him talking about outside of the boot, inside of the boot, left foot, right foot. I can hear him telling them where to throw the ball. My child's learning there. That's proper football. And that's a really crucial battle that we have with every adult and potentially that's got any experience of football that comes into the club, and coaches who want to coach as well, because we all feel as adults we've got so much to share, got so much football knowledge we want to give children, and trying to provide opportunities to play that aren't contingent on the adult voice is a real challenge to most adults, because they're just used to a different way of doing things. And so it can be the case that children will come to us and their parents will say, wow, this is such a much more positive experience. But it can equally be the case that they come to us and go somewhere else because they don't necessarily value positivity and they don't think their child is learning. We've got a race to nowhere culture. Yeah. We've got to get children, we feel, being like a little elite, what's that word? Premature professionalism players. We've got to get them in those kind of, teams where they use the word high performance or elite or academy. We've got to get them there as quickly as possible. And primarily we all want to end up with the kids in the academy system because that's the way they become professional footballers. Is the evidence supporting that? I don't know. That is the only way children have a development pathway at the moment. Is it a successful development pathway? Question mark, I would say. Can we do it in another way? Potentially, I don't know. There are questions to be asked each and every level of the journey. But because of this drive, what progress is my child making? Are they getting better? Are they better than the other child who's just been selected by this elite performance squad? Are they better than the other child who's just gone into an academy? Take a breath.
You think about
take a breath and wait.
When you think about how culturally rooted that is, though, I mean, your point is a brilliant point. I love this idea of premature professionalism. It's actually, it's kind of football environmentalism versus premature professionalism. But something that's occurred to me, and I've experienced this myself, goes back to something I was saying about governing bodies. When we brought about, when I was working in rugby, we brought about some change to the competitive landscape, and we actually brought in this idea that we're going to have these festivals where it's an experience, a rugby experience that's competitive, because there is another team and we're going to compete and we're going to do all those sorts of things, but we're de-emphasizing the outcome. So that's where we're not putting the cups and the shields and this, that, and the other, and we're saying at this age group we're going to try and keep it, and so the focus can be much, much more on play. And then the coaches aren't feeling like, oh, I've got to pick the best team. We've got ABCs, all these sorts of things. Now, so, great, good environment. So, one county took it upon themselves to go, do you know what? We used to run a tournament for under 10s that was all like super serious. We're bought into this, so we're going to put on a festival instead of a tournament. There was an outcry. We're talking national newspapers. Yeah. We're talking about my development director on TV defending this decision because, in inverted commas, rugby's gone soft.
Yeah.
And then the debate, right? So you start scrolling through the comments, that people are making against an article in a newspaper, and it's absolutely polarized. You've basically got what I describe as being, ultra right wing. Sport is there to teach children the values of life, and if they don't get those values from competitiveness and learning to win and lose, then they're going to be ruined for the rest of their lives, and they'll just be walking through life as complete zombies. On the flip side, you've got other people going, talking sort of more of our language, but they're castigated as being tree huggers.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, soft, pink and fluffy, la 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 la. And honestly, it is that vitriolic. And then you've got a governing body trying to do the right thing in the middle of it, being castigated from both sides.
I totally agree. And I think part of that difficulty can be how we conceptualize and articulate competition for children. There is research on how children view a competition and what they feel is important. But even putting that aside, exploring what really is competition. Again, it's that adult perception of that it means kids in kits, in teams, in leagues, in a format that we've set up, and in which one team will win, and that will be that's real competition. That there has to be a scoreline that shows that someone's trounced another team. But we want our children to grow up to be truly competitive individuals, there has to be autonomy and self-motivation. So one of the biggest things you'll hear from the touchlines, one of the loudest cries is, go on, keep going. Why? Why? Because we're having to encourage children to be competitive. We're having to encourage children to take people on, to keep running. We're having to encourage children to make that tackle or to keep going even though they've got two players to take on. That's true competition and bravery. And we lose sight of that individual responsibility for the role that you have got on the pitch, for me, is the essence of competition. So you end up with parents and adults saying, oh, my kid is so competitive, he hates to lose and will cry and throw a massive tantrum. Well, that may be the case, and that might be because he's a child. But at 14 or 15, that child or that young person has really not developed a true sense of being a competitor. And so it's about saying to each and every child that's on that pitch today, it's about what you do. It's about what you do for yourself. Who makes you a better footballer at the end of the day? You know, it's a question I often ask the children. Sometimes they'll say me dad, but you know, it is like, well, actually it's you. The only person who's really going to drive this forward and make you, you know, a better footballer, a better competitor is yourself. Coach can't do that for you. And so if we kind of reconceptualize competition to see that as an individual responsibility, I think, you know, that might be easier to see why we have to sit back a little bit and not be so outcome focused and scoreline focused, because it doesn't say, you know, I often again say to children, if you're on the winning side but don't get one touch of the ball in the match, how does that make you a better player? Because children will naturally want to win. And sometimes that's a difficult conversation. They don't always buy into that. Why should they? They've got their own opinions. But it is, you know, what particularly as they get older, they do see that. If they're not contributing, if they're not doing anything, if they're not engaged in the game, does it matter if they win? Because the competition would say, those who say competition is all about results would say, yes, it does matter. But actually, in terms of making them a true competitor and a better footballer, it's utterly meaningless. So I think it's about reconceptualizing things like that, really.
And that's evidenced, I think, by the speed at which the outcome of the game is completely wiped from the mind of the child.
Yeah.
You know, we'll go play a festival, we'll have lots of different games that will have had different score lines, and I guarantee that the kids in the back of my car on the way home, they're not talking about that.
No, they're not. No.
They're playing a game at waving at the people at the sideline to see if they can, on the side of the road, who can see they get them to wave back.
Yeah.
It's gone. It's gone. We're the ones dwelling on it. Oh, God, you know, if only I'd, and this, that, and the other.
And it's also that we put, you know, adults put a lot of pressure on themselves to make, they feel perhaps like they've got to manage, as you do if you're a professional coach, and that results are a reflection of your coaching ability. 100%. And so, you know, to be able to detach that and say, look, you know, it's about you empowering those children on a pitch to be the best that they can be. That's your role as a coach. And that might be different levels of intervention for different children, different levels of support. But a lot of the time it means creating a positive environment where your children know that if they come off the pitch and, you know, they've made mistakes, and no one is going to like shout at them about that, because that is part of the game, you know, and that's the positive culture you've got to create, really.
It's a really important point around ego.
Yeah.
And whenever people talk about ego, they tend to think that they're talking about egotistical.
Yeah.
And so people with, you know, a big idea of who they are. It's not necessarily the case. Ego gets at you in lots of different ways. So again, you know, let's take that example I used before, where, you know, my son's first experience. Before that game started, I arrived and I was watching the two teams. And you had one team, very structured, very organised, structured warm-up, you know, sprinting across the pitch, doing all that sort of stuff. The other side, the team that my son was on, was they had different balls and they were throwing them around. They were playing like a warm-up game. Yeah. That's because the coach is very philosophically aligned to the idea of play being valuable. So he went and joined in, and off they went. And then, but after the game, you know, one side had lost 10-0, and it wasn't the side that was. And it wasn't the side that was the side that lost 10-0 was the one playing beforehand. So you can imagine, can't you, that the uninitiated would be watching that going, well, look, they didn't warm up properly. They didn't do it seriously. And look what happened. They lost 10-0. Well, surprise, surprise.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, as a coach as well, the ego element of that is hard, because I know that coach will probably feel it's a reflection on him.
Yeah.
But if you can get rid of the ego piece, and actually just go, we're providing an experience. Let's see what's valuable in the experience. And in fairness to him, he was able to say, as we reflected together on the side, he was saying, but look at what they tried. You could see the moments of learning in there.
Oh, we all concentrate on every single time. If I have, you know, if a coach arrives or the coach watches it, they immediately look. I was watching a school football match last night, and there were dads there as well, and they're just immediately looking at everything they think the children are doing wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like there's no positivity there. Let's start again, going back to that long-term approach, there's no race. If I'm in it for the long haul, for their child's sake, I want them to buy in it, if this is a long journey. Let's do it together. There'll be loads of mistakes along the way, but let's look at the positives that come out. But I think that's where when if you've got that focus on the positives, that you can be accused of being that happy clappy, not serious about football culture. So it's about making those messages as clear as you can about this being a very long developmental journey, and it's one that's driven by the child, and it's got to be fun, because fun sustains everything. Even at the top, highest level, those players still enjoy kicking a ball about and playing football, and if they didn't, they wouldn't be the players that they are. And maybe part of what, if I reflect, part of what drives me is that I come from a culture in where, street football was the norm. I lived on a massive council estate in the northwest. Girls and boys and, teams of 30 against 20 was on a big field as well, was not unusual. And it just seems that we've lost all of that. And the creativity in my generation growing up and seeing players that were able to do things that were kind of the maverick players was what we always wanted to see. We weren't as technically as proficient in those days, but there seems to be a kind of individual expression which we kind of lose now from the game, even at perhaps sometimes the highest level of players that we're producing. And so it's about keeping that play value right central to everything that we do. And that goes across community football, which I've not talked about as well, which is absolutely instrumental, because we are more than just club sessions for matches. We are much more than that. We are a club that delivers and provides free football in a variety of contexts in areas of our community of socioeconomic relative disadvantage. And we also provide free football for girls. We do free football, disability football. No child should be excluded from football for disability, gender, race, and financial reasons. And this is, where I could get really on my hobby horse, because we are creating now a football culture which is progressively more elitist and exclusive. And you've got to have money to join it. And again, if I look back to my background, that was not the case. It was free to play football until a much later age when people joined teams, because I'm quite old. And girls weren't allowed to join teams or play formally then either. But you did, you had a football culture which was open to children because it was led by children. Now we've got a football culture which is created and led by adults, and it's becoming more and more exclusive. And so we've got children who come from, an inner city estate in the middle of Salisbury, which is not inner city Manchester or Liverpool or Birmingham or London, but it's a small patch of council housing in the middle of the city in the shadow of the cathedral, and they've got a ball court. And some of the best football I see all week is played on that ball court by children who've got no formal coaching at all. And what we've tried to do is then create opportunities for them to link into more formal structures and play matches. And some of the football that comes from them is exceptional, but it comes from them because of their self-motivated play, their desire and joy to try new things, and predominantly their willingness and bravery in just taking people on all the time. And they create some, magical moments of football. And so I think you've got, if coaches can see that children are doing this without them, then, it maybe puts in context what we actually think we're adding with our coaching interventions all the time. I'm not saying that we can't add things, we can. But it's about creating that culture in which there's not a distinction between that play that's away from adults, or not so stark a distinction, and that more formal club culture in which children come to, what others would call train. If we can, make those worlds meet a little bit more, then we might, continue that creativity across settings.
That for me is there's so much in that. We haven't even talked about the manifesto yet. We're coming on to that in a minute. But anyway, just there's so much in that, in the sense that people can't conceive of the idea, and in actual fact, it actually I think it kind of bristles a little bit with coaches. That what? Yeah, people can develop skill without us. Of course, yeah. Well, they'll all just be too raw, won't they? They won't really know how to play. It's kind of, again, it comes back to our ego. It makes you bristle. Like, well, they're not going to be as good as if they were with me. But the point you've got there is that skill does develop, right? It does emerge out of certain environments where there are certain cultures, freedom of expression, opportunities for creativity, no judgment. Apart from the judgment of peers, but even then, that if the culture is, we're all doing this, so let's all crack on. And I'm like you, I came from a childhood, interestingly, in the Northwest, where play and, some of my fondest childhood memories are in self-directed play experiences, where we've created our own world, our own competitive structures, lunch times, we were out there, we were doing American football, basketball, we played cricket, we played all sorts of different things. And they're my fondest memories. My least fond memories are formal.
Yeah.
I've got two, right? Two. One, playing in a league, a little village club against the Chester Academy.
Yeah.
Right? We got beat 24-0. I was in goal.
Yeah.
That was not a fun experience for anyone. Yeah. Right? Then the other one was, and I think the 24 was like, we did well to keep it to 24.
Good gamekeeper.
Yeah. And then the second one was when our coach at halftime had a fight with the referee who was their coach.
Oh, God.
I said, I'm not playing again.
Yeah.
At 13, I'm never playing this sport again. And that was it. That was the moment, right? And I'm like, what the hell is this about? This? I remember us, we were at halftime, we all got together while those two were at it, just thinking, looking at each other, just going, what's going on here? This is mental.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's just by the by. But the point you made about this idea that we don't necessarily need to be there. So if Mark O'Sullivan talks about this, if you're going to step in, better be adding value.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and not just talking for the sake of it. One of my
justifying our existence there.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's lots of good stuff coming with coaching qualifications, but there's this like obsession with the drive-by. We've got to be seen to be, getting in there and making comments, because otherwise, how does anybody know that we're coaching? So you end up with a succession of people intervening all the time in a little match of 7-year-olds. So they're not they may not be directing play from the sidelines, but they're saying to each individual all the time, do this, or it's great the way you did this. Could you now do this? Could you now do that? Stop. Let them play. Because you know what? Some of the things that you think you're adding value, if you waited 6 months, they might be doing for themselves. That's a thing that I wrestle with all the time. Sometimes you can see a child struggling. They don't think they're struggling. We would say they're struggling with something, and this is an important distinction as well, that, is the child unhappy? Is the child feels they're engaged and they're happy? That might be, you leave well alone. But if you think the child needs a little bit of help, would the child get there anyway? Would the child get there without you if you just let them play and if they played enough? And sometimes you can see children not getting something, and it might then create a self-esteem issue for them, so that you might want to give them a little chat about something. But I always err on the side of non-intervention because of what I've seen with children who aren't intervened with.
I can't tell you how hard, as a coach, I can't tell you how hard that is,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I coach. I know. Sometimes, and you want to be able to say, and everybody from the sidelines will tell you. If you went and asked all the parents, what do you think the kids should have been doing in that last quarter? Everybody will have a different opinion. That's all meaningless to the children. So, if you're going to contribute one thing, you contribute one. In 15 minutes of play, you can make 1 point perhaps that might make a difference to them in their play. And if you can ask a question and they come up with that themselves, wow. That and that's what our older children tend to do. I don't even you don't often have to structure anything, because you can say what's going really well, and they'll reel off all the stuff that's going well. Is there anything we need to improve on? And they'll say, yeah, we need to do this, we need to do that. We're getting caught out on the left, blah de blah. What are you going to do about it? Okay, off you go, back on the pitch.
It's interesting, because going back to what I was just saying about how hard it is. The reason is that because a lot of us as coaches are, we're kind of built, you ask coaches, why do they coach? One of the big things that always comes back to me is they want to help. They want to contribute, they want to help. So of course, to then not do that, it feels as if somebody's bleeding out and you haven't called the ambulance.
Yeah.
You haven't stepped in and put a bandage on it. You feel like you're like, it feels like it's kind of an abdication of responsibility, but actually there are ways and means. So your point is a really valuable one. And I think that we're far too quick to solve problems for people, to solve problems for kids and give them the solution. Here's my knowledge now. I've got some knowledge. Look. And by the way, there's an awful lot of people out there going, well, that's coaching. Well, not necessarily. Not if they would have got there themselves, and it's a much more powerful learning.
You assume that the knowledge the coach has got is the right knowledge
of
that child. And that to me is a critical issue, because so many times I've heard, in fact, I watched one match with, again, one of our kind of street footballers who hit a ball, scored a fantastic goal, but the preceding moments to that, the other coach from the other side to who I was chatting with was going, switch play, switch, 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 switch. And then he hit it, goal. So it's like, had the knowledge that coach had that he thought he would have been able to pass on, had that been his child on his team, would have been, from all intents and purposes, wouldn't have ended up in a goal and would have been the wrong decision. So that child on the pitch knew more in that moment. And so we've got to always think about the dynamic nature of football, and that the players who are situated on the pitch have got an experience that we don't have on the sidelines. But also, that the baggage that we have from our own experience, whether that's, formal football or coaching or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean we've got the right knowledge for that child in that moment. And in that moment in their learning journey too. So sorry, I interrupted.
No, you're right. No, it's fine. It's an assumption. Like you say, it's an assumption that we know what, and we don't even bother to even ask that question of kind of what was it you experienced, felt, saw that led to that particular action. Your point about drive-bys, I want to make this point really interesting. So I think you're right. I mean, it's a bit of it's funny how these terms become like,
drive-by killings.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? When I don't really do drive-bys anymore. But what I do, if I do something, is it's a couple of things. So one is I might have created a point system in the game that might place emphasis on a particular action, or a particular the player recognizing a moment for an activity, for example. So, and the reason I'll give a point and I'll call a point out is because I kind of want the players to recognize the moment. It's almost like putting a video tag in the live play on the moment that's taking place. And so I'll say, point Sammy, or whatever it might be, point Gemma, whatever it might be, and it's so that they recognize, that was it.
Yeah.
And that's the only piece, right? And then the other one is that if I pull a player out, which I do pretty regularly, it's only ever nowadays, it's only ever to highlight with them a moment of brilliance.
Yeah.
So I'll say I did it with the player the other day. I said, when you got the ball then, what happened? Tell me what happened. And he went, well, I went there and I got past him. And I went, why? He went, because I didn't run straight. I run on an angle. And we'd developed this. The kids had developed this idea that, in fact, their phraseology was straight is death. Based on Fortnite, right? You can never run straight because you get shot. So straight is death. So we're exploring how we can run with the ball on angles in order to create opportunities for space.
Yeah.
And so they were, so he said, I didn't run straight. I ran on the angle. And said, you got past him, didn't you? And I said, you got past him, didn't you? He went, yeah. I went, nice, isn't it? And he's like, yeah. And like back in, just to highlight for that individual at that point, or sometimes as a group, that was it. Do you recognize that moment? Because I just want you to make sure you recognize that moment, and then away, and off you go.
And I think that's it. I think, and everybody's got their own style of coaching. It's really important not to be kind of, preachy about it. I think if what you're focusing on is the child's experience of the learning, then that, you're going to develop that in different ways because of the different person, we're all different people, so we're going to do that in different ways as well. But the core point of all of that is not to have that intervention, particularly before the decision making occurs.
No.
To correct that decision making because we think it's wrong all the time, and children are very good at evaluating things, if you give them the time and space. I think that's another critical point about environments creation really is that it's not all about the technical proficiency. That we see, that a lot of coaches will focus on because they feel that that's where they're comfortable. There was a conversation, I think, on Twitter this morning about, coaches not being comfortable with the psychological side of the game and supporting children psychologically. For me, I suppose that would be my predominant area of comfort, more than anything else, that it's making hopefully children feel that they can achieve whatever they want to achieve when they're on the pitch, that there is no fear of failure if they're coached, in a team that I run. Because my background is different. I'm of an age, as I say, where I didn't play football in school, and it's because girls didn't, and girls weren't allowed to play in football teams. So I was a football fan. So I don't come through that experience, and maybe that relieves me of some of the kind of technical baggage that others have. But my approach is then to concentrate on an emotionally safe environment for children, an emotionally safe environment in which children don't fear failure.
I can't tell you how important that is, and I can't tell you the fear of failure, or even just the fear of the possibility of failure.
Yeah.
So you cannot have, people don't sort of seem to get this, you cannot have true creativity and freedom of expression if there is any fear of failure. Right. And the fear of failure isn't necessarily the fear of admonishment or consequence, but it's the fact that the coach has kind of made it clear to an individual that there is a right way. Yeah. And that can even happen in questioning. There's really well-meaning coaches out there using questions, but they're basically playing the coaching guessing game. There's a right answer to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to ask you some questions, and we're eventually going to arrive at the right answer. And everybody will know it was right. Yeah. But there's fear of failure there because they now know there's an individual walking around observing with a right and wrong.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
And it's not really, and so for me, this is the point, is it's not about right and wrong. And I talk about this in decision making in workshops all the time. Is there such a thing as a right or wrong decision? And people do say, yes, there is. Why? Because of the outcome. No, it's not. You can't base it on the outcome. You've got to base it on the information.
Yeah.
And if you have a game model and you've made it clear to the individual that there's a game model, and that game model, if you decided to do this, by the way, and there's a game model, a tactical game model that we're going to abide by. And if an individual then makes a decision based on the stuff in front of them, what they see, what their moments, that's not aligned to the game model, you can have a conversation about that if you want. Or you can just explore with them the experience that they've had and what led to the courses of action. Absolutely. That's the bit we've got to get into. We've got to understand their experience far more.
Absolutely. That's so critical. And I think to sell this as opposed to people would be to say how much it impacts on performance, how much it's so obvious if you see children playing in different contexts because perhaps they're playing for a different team or for a school, and you can see that fear of failure has set in. You can see how it inhibits play because, children are second guessing themselves, overthinking everything, they're worried about what they're doing, and they're children. So there's even a stronger argument really to create an environment in which learning is, not fear-based. We don't expect children to have fear-based learning when they go to school. You get stuff wrong in your maths class and, all hell will break loose. But to create that positivity and that lack of fear, that will hopefully translate itself into much more creativity on the pitch, because children will be willing to take that extra player on, or to pass from the back, or to do something different. That just seems to me to be common sense and critical too.
That's why I conceive of, I always talk about this as about skill being a problem solving endeavor.
Yeah.
Because people think of a bit like school, actually. They think of skill being, basically the acquisition of techniques.
Yeah.
So you basically just build your technical toolbox, and you can do stuff. I can do moves, I can do pullbacks, I can do dribble overs, I can do all sorts of whatever it is. And when I've got those, if I've got those techniques and I can display them, I'm deemed skillful. And don't get me wrong, this gets you picked, right? This gets you selected for teams. You see individuals, look at what they can do. Right off they go. Forget the fact that they've got no conception of anybody else there, and they've got no, so the point being is that skill is the ability to perceive information live in the moment, and there's an awful lot of it in a dynamic game like football, perceive information in the moment and take certain courses of action depending on that information. Well, there are generations of kids who've been taught technique, who are basically now just going, forget information. I've never learned this move with any other information in play. So forget information. I'm just going to do a move. And it's a lottery. Sometimes it'll work. Sometimes it won't. Really don't know the difference between when it did and when it didn't, because I'm not interested in anything else.
Yeah.
You just got to reconceptualize skill. You reconceptualize skill. Then you create different environments where skill can emerge from.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely agree. I think it's, and again, you go back to the kind of ball court players, you see that all the time, and they've got the confidence to do that as well, because that's the way they've learned. And so it is harder, with sometimes with children coming from a more kind of formal education background, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
Because I would use this practical example. If you put a ball on a pitch, you turn up for a training session, you put a ball on a pitch, there will be some children who will kick that ball straight away, and they're often playing a game.
Yeah.
And they don't need to be told anything. You might have to call them back in because you want them to do something. You put a ball on a pitch, and there'll be children who'll be waiting for the session to start.
Yeah.
Because they're waiting for adult-led intervention.
Yeah, permission.
And so it's all part of the same thing, really, to create that environment in which there is no fear of failure means that the adult ego, the adult role, which is ego driven sometimes in the true sense of the word ego, is reduced. And so if our role is visibly and vocally reduced, it doesn't mean we're not coaching, because we can create the games that they play, but if we can step back a bit from that, then it does allow that freedom to flourish, hopefully.
So talk to me about, because I'm conscious that, and it always never ceases to amaze me, by the way, about how quickly time goes when I'm having these fantastic conversations. Talk to me about the manifesto. What was the genesis of that? And then, and talk me through it.
Yeah, well, every year the last couple of years that we've run, we've tried to pull something together for the start of the season. We always get new players at the start of the season, and we're always very clear when we have contact from new players about who we are and what we are. Our website's really clear and everything. But sometimes there is a sense of that, you can say, here's our code of conduct, but it doesn't really mean anything until there's a match, or have a look at the website, and people might not actually do that. So we wanted to have something which was more kind of pronounced about, this is the way, actually, this is what we stand for, this is the way we do things. And so the manifesto seemed to be a good idea. It took lots of soundings off lots of very helpful coaches on Twitter, including yourself, and our coaches too. And so we wanted to really summarise in a nutshell those key features, really, of what we do and what we believe in. And so hopefully, I've just got the manifesto in front of me, but it is about bringing the youth football game back to the children who play it. That might sound like a soundbite, but it actually means it connects with everything that I've been saying about reducing that adult role, reducing that cult of the coach, which has taken over youth football, really, ensuring there is greater access in the game. And again, a point which kind of burns fiercely with me is that financial limitation. We have a lot of children who play in the club who offer, are given free access to football through us, and that includes team football. But to play in leagues these days, you often need parents who've got cars who can transport you. You need money for kit, you need money for boots, and you need money for subs. Then we've got, on top of that, we've got the whole tranche of really expensive elite coaching, academies, high performance squads, bridging that terrible gap that there is between grassroots and academy football. And that costs you a fortune as well. So all the sense that children are really being left out of the game. So that was a really core point, really, for us. And retention. So again, it's about making sure that parents hopefully can see we're not in a race. We're not in a race. If they come to us at 6, we're not measuring their progress by how close they are to getting into an academy. We're here for the long term. We're creating, as Mark O'Sullivan would say, the best environment possible so that they can stay in the game for as long as possible. And with those positive environments, or the result of the creation of those positive environments really comes from having a positive and knowledgeable coaching workforce. So back to us, we evaluate ourselves, we question ourselves. I'm an absolute pain probably on a Saturday when I'm going around coaching sessions, like, why are we doing that? This isn't working, and why have we set up the game in that way? Did that work for the children? Do we know, were the children happy? All the time asking questions of ourselves. Can we be better? Are our children getting the best possible experience from us? And as adults, we shouldn't be worried about asking those questions of ourselves. It's all for the children. If we seemingly make mistakes to our coaching plan and the children are happy, so what? But as long as the children are in the best environment, we can, that's the core driving force of what we do. But we can only do that if we make sure that we have the knowledge and enlighten ourselves about what learning means for children, and that we're constantly questioning the delivery of that with children.
I think that's really important, by the way. And it sounds to me, you just made me think of something. There's a guy called, I think his name is Joan Villa at Barcelona, whose title is Director of Methodology.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like you play that role slightly. Because it would be about asking those questions. Why have we set the game up in this way?
Well, I think it's like that question that you touched on, as well as those mindset questions, aren't they? Why do we coach the way that we coach? What's it like to be coached by us? How many people ask that? I'm kind of fortunate because what I do matches across the age group, so from under 6 to under 14. There's not a match I'm not involved in really, but predominantly I run the older boys team. My son's in that team, so I ask him all the time. It's really important to me. What was the experience of? What was that game that I set up? Did you like it? Was it fun? I ask the boys that when we do that on our kind of sessions. Did this work? What did you get out of it? Was there anything you would change about it? Did you like it? Because it's got to work for them. I'm not here for myself. And go and read a load of coaching books in the room on my own and watch YouTube all day. If I wanted to be here for myself, it's for them. It's got to work for them. And so that's what it's all about, putting the child in the centre, but making ourselves as good as we can be so that we can provide the best possible environment. And so a lot of then the kind of we will statements in our manifesto are about then saying how we will concretely achieve the kind of environment that we want to create. So we've got that flexibility in our model to be able to play children across age groups. And importantly, that means playing children down into age groups as well, because that's something that's so overlooked that, once you're in a league, if you're kind of new to footballing, you maybe want to play five-a-side, you can't jump down a year. And we've got these artificial age barriers between children, which don't work. And so we try and create an environment in where children play in teams which suit their needs best, basically. The pathway that we have would add more structure probably as they get older. But I was only talking about this with somebody the other day, that actually that happens organically. In a sense, because the children want that and the children need that. So, a team at under 10s is very different to a team at under 14s because, the under 13, under 14 boys know what they want from the game. They've got a really clear idea, and we can talk about how we can, make that happen and how they're going to deliver concretely on the pitch to do the things that they want to do in the match. But I can't do the things with them that I can't do the things with under 7s that I would do with under 14s. It's understanding that there is a distinction and that there is that organic process of development, which happens throughout the year group. So it's making parents try and understand all of that, and of course that the value of free play lies at the heart of our club. And Joy of the People did that amazing podcast recently with you, which rung so many bells, and it's so brilliant to see what they're doing because, I'm a passionate believer in the importance of play on so many levels, not just from a football perspective, but just from the social perspective, the enjoyment perspective, and just as part of children growing up in their overstructured, adult-led outcome-based childhood that they all seem to have these days. They rush from one club to another. Around here they sit the 11 plus as well. Everything's a race to destroy kind of childhood experiences. And as you quite rightly said, you sound like you come from an area very close to where I was brought up. I'm from Liverpool, but brought up in Ellesmere Port.
Yeah, we are very nearby.
We were left to our own devices, and there's a lot to be said for that. There has to be private space for children without adults. There really does. And this, we can make that safe, but they have to lead it. And it's such an important part of what we do.
Yeah. So I was, my parents were from Birkenhead, but I was brought up in North Wales.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a plastic scouser, they call it. I mean, look, like I said, I could talk to you forever. I knew when I was having the conversation with Ted from Joy of the People, I was thinking about you guys as well. And I was thinking it'd be really good to have you on. And that's one of the reasons I was so keen to get you on, because I think there's so much connection. And the great thing is that, like I said, there is this movement. I feel it. I feel this movement towards this direction. I think it's hard, and you found it very difficult. I think you're very brave when you do something like this, and you do have to fly against the prevailing culture. You probably find yourself justifying the approach all the time, because isn't it sad how this is, you have to justify this as a way for children to experience sport.
Yeah, definitely. There's no, and it comes down to the lack of value we put on a childhood experience, because it's not just play, but it's about the whole. Play is at the heart of the child's experience on so many levels, and we've just professionalized the experience of childhood from top to bottom.
So what I was going to say then was, so the thing is that I know that people out there, you're going to be inundated, or I'm going to be inundated with requests for more information. How can I get hold of the manifesto? All that sort of stuff. I'm assuming that if they get in touch, firstly, what's the best medium for them to get in touch?
They can get in touch. They've got a website, so all the information is on the website. Salisbury Rovers fc.co.uk. Also, you can get in touch with me personally as well through the club.
Well, you're very active on Twitter. There's a club email on the website, and you're very active on Twitter as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So I'm sure they can engage that way as well. Because I think, like you, I think there are a lot of you out there. You're living and breathing it, and through this conversation, I've made notes to myself around, we need to do that better. We need to do that better. We need to do that better. And that's the great thing about these kinds of conversations. It always stimulates those reflections of, oh, yes, that's something we need to do.
But this is so critical, isn't it? This is so critical. Like this sort of conversation that we've had today is the sort of conversation, I want going through from top to bottom throughout our club and through with other coaches that I meet. We should all be having this conversation because we all want the best for children. So we've all got to keep talking. And that means not being defensive. It means just opening our minds and discussing and changing where we need to, and recognizing where we see good practice and sharing it.
Brilliant place to bring our conversation to a conclusion. Debbie, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm really glad we were able to find the time to have the conversation. I'd love if you're willing to maybe reconnect sometime in the future, because I'd like to stay close to your journey if that's possible. And,
of course.
I think you sharing your experiences and the challenges and issues and some of the things that you're innovating with, I know it'll give a lot of other people out there who are on this journey as well. It'll give them a lot of sense of confidence that they're on the right path. And also, many of the things that you're doing are really, really innovative and really quite, sadly, they're innovative in the sense that, but you know what I mean? Isn't it? These ideas are fantastic for organisations, for other organisations to follow suit.
Yeah, of course.
Great stuff. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
So there you have it.
Wow, that was a fantastic conversation with Debbi. I mean, it's been really keen to have that conversation, and it was beyond what I expected. That is an organisation that is bucking the trend, really committed to providing player-centred experience for young people, prepared to go the extra mile, prepared to challenge convention and norms, prepared to break free of existing structures in order to be able to fulfil that mission. So, I mean, I've got no end of admiration for that organisation. I came away reflecting and thinking. I made a load of notes thinking there's some real areas that we could do better in the clubs that I'm involved with and in my own practice. So I hope you came away with similar thoughts. As always, if you like the podcast, you like what we're trying to do here, then maybe you might take some time just to head over to any of the podcatchers you're on and leave us a review. They're really appreciated, and also it helps other people find the material, and hopefully you can help them as well. You can still support the podcast through Patreon. It's the equivalent of buying me a cup of coffee once a month if you feel so inclined. I do drink a lot of coffee, so that would be good. And also there are some places still available on the Conclave, which is the private mastermind group that coaches get together with me on a monthly basis online and work through some of the challenges we're facing. If you want to come and see me face to face, I've got a couple of events running in the new year, in January and March. Head over to the events page of the website and you can find out more details. In the meantime, have a great week of coaching, and remember, ditch those drills.